Scott Lauber is going to join us to talk a little Phillies, as this team has just kind of been a conundrum, man. I don't know what – I mean, at this point, like Harry May said today, he's out. He's out on the team. I don't know that I can just go in with 2 feet and say I'm out, because the league is bad enough that I can hang around. I don't have any excitement. Where did it all go wrong? Were our expectations too high? Where do we point the finger? We're in Philly. We got to point the finger at somebody.
You have to.
So let's bring Scott Lauber in from the Inquirer, Inquirer.com, and he joins us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as this Phillies team is a conundrum, Scott. I mean, the expectations were high. There's still a game out of the wild card, but it feels like people just don't believe. Is that what you get? Do you feel like people have kind of given up hope on this team?
Well, I think it kind of depends, guys, on how you define success for this particular team this year. I'll tell you a quick story. I was in spring training, and I was talking to Shane Victorino, and we were talking a little bit about this team and what they put together, and he was as excited as just about anyone about what they had and what they were building. But he made the point that, look, I mean, if you think back to the teams that he was on, it kind of built gradually, right? Like in 2006, they traded Bobby Abreu and just missed the playoffs. And then in 2007, they rallied in September, overtook the Mets, and they got in. But then they got crushed by the Rockies, right, in the playoffs. And then in 2008, they finally got over the hump and they won it. So it built little bit by little bit. And he said what concerned him was that everyone was expecting, this team to go right from, 80 and 82 last year and out of the playoffs for a 7th straight year straight to the World Series. And it doesn't always happen that way. So if your definition of success for this Phillies team was to make the playoffs, then you've still got a baseball season left. You've got 2 more months left with a team that's a game out of the wild card, and either because they are good enough or the rest of the league is bad enough, they should still be in that race, that wild card race, right through the end. Whether they make it or not, I expect that they're going to be in the hunt. But if your definition of success was win the division and be a World Series team, then you're probably going to look at this year as a failure, and you're going to say they didn't live up to their expectations. So I think it all kind of depends on what your outlook was for the team at the start and how you feel about, and that's going to determine about what you're going to see for the last 2 months, because I don't think anything that happened over the weekend against the Braves changed who they are, which is a sort of wild card-ish team, but not a team that's ready to win the division yet and is favorite.
Yeah, I mean, the question that we kind of, like, if the Phillies made it to that wild card game, played the one game, and got knocked out, do you reflect back and say, that was a good season? And I think you just kind of answered it. Well, if your expectations were just get to the playoffs, and that's good, then yes. But if you wanted to win the World Series, then probably no. But the question I really have is, Scott, what is the direction of the franchise? When I watch the Braves, when I watch the Nationals, heck, even when I watch the Mets, I almost feel better about the Mets than I do, because it seems that the Phillies have been bad for so long that you'd be like, all right, they've had to have stockpiled some, some talent that makes me excited. The Braves have that kind of talent. The Nationals have that kind of talent. Heck, even the Mets have that kind of talent. It seems that the Phillies, in all these bad years when no one was really paying attention, didn't stockpile any of their own talent. And that's where it's like, okay, even if you're in the playoffs this year, what's next?
Well, I think there's some truth to that. Look, I think that in some ways the current regime is still paying for the last regime in its final years, really not building up much of a farm system, and we know how far behind they were in terms of analytics and all of that stuff. And I wrote something recently about the Clentac era drafts and what they've yielded. And really the conclusion that I drew from talking to people outside the organization was it's too soon to go full out and declare that they failed in these drafts. Normally what baseball people like to say is that it takes about 5 years to evaluate a draft. And so while the 2015, 16, 17, 18 drafts have not really yielded much yet, I think if you look around the league, they haven't yielded a whole lot yet. So if we're still here a year or two from now and we're talking about especially the 16, 17 drafts and saying they got nothing out of that, then fine. But, they feel like they've got Spencer Howard on the way. They feel like they've got Alec Boehm on the way. And those guys are just now getting to Double-A, and they're just now getting to that level of the minor leagues where it starts to feel close. Until now, look, Boehm was drafted a year ago. Howard was drafted a couple of years ago and had a little bit of arm trouble earlier this year. They were both in Single-A, really, for the majority of the last year plus. And so they were light years away. Now they're getting a little bit closer, and if you get a couple of guys like that who come through your system, then all of a sudden you feel better about it. So I do think there's talent in the system. I don't think it's as dry down there as some people would have you believe. I also don't think it's good as some teams' farm systems. But really, the next year plus are going to tell the story of whether they're going to have, if they have a homegrown third baseman next year in Alec Boehm, and if they have a guy in Spencer Howard that by the middle of next year is up in their rotation, it's going to look a whole lot better than it looks right now.
So what do they do from here then, Scott? Because, okay, fair enough. They have to wait maybe another year or two to see how some prospects really develop and what they have. But here we are today talking about, people that are out. They haven't lived up to expectations. People aren't buying in around the city that want to jump in, want a bandwagon to appear in front of their house. It's not happening. What does the organization do after this season? Is it a quote-unquote process that the people have to trust? Or is it we need to make a move now because we just made all these other moves this past offseason?
Again, I go back to define how you feel about what would make the team a success. I sort of feel like the spin we're going to get from the Phillies, and it is spin, but maybe there's also some truth to it, is that, making the playoffs this year, even as a wild card, would not be insignificant. When you've missed the playoffs every year since 2011, getting in and actually just sniffing it is part of this process element to what they're trying to do. So if that's your goal, if your goal is to just get in, there are pitchers they can acquire in the next 48 hours who could help them do that. They're not going to knock your socks off as far as names go, but I mentioned in something I wrote today, a guy in Cincinnati named Tanner Roark who used to pitch for the Nationals. He's familiar to Phillies fans from that. Now, he's not a great pitcher, and he's not going to suddenly turn you into a World Series contender. But maybe he's a guy who can go out every fifth day and give you a representative start, unlike some of the guys that they've been putting out there lately. Zach Eflin has really had now a rough month and a half. It's gotten to the point where you're putting him out there every fifth day and having no idea what he's going to give you. Jake Arrieta, he's got that bone spur in his elbow. I don't even know how much longer he's going to be able to go with that without having to have that treated. So a guy like a Tanner Roark can at least go out and give you 5 or 6 innings to start and give you a chance to win. So it's not a move that would send everyone, to the ticket office and run out and buy your playoff tickets, but it might be enough to give you that little nudge that you need to get into the wild card, which, if that's how you define success this year, would be something that I think would be a welcome move. You look at some of the moves they made back in 07, 06, 07, when they were not yet a World Series contender. Kyle Loesch didn't really get everyone going crazy in 07, but he did help them make the playoffs. So I think that's the kind of move you might see them make in the next 48 hours before the deadline on Wednesday. I think that there's a good case to be made that they need to do more than that they need to go out and they need to go get a controllable young starting pitcher, which is going to cost more. It's going to cost more in terms of prospects you're giving back and things like that. But given the state of their rotation, if you feel strongly about Matthew Boyd or Mike Minor or guys of that ilk, well, they're out there and they're available to a certain extent if you want to pay for them. And you could go make a case that the Phillies rotation is in such a state that they need to go and they need to make a trade for one of those guys, not just for this season, but for the next few seasons while they wait for Spencer Howard and Adonis Medina and some of the pitching talent that they think they have that is a little bit behind where the Phillies might be in terms of their timeline to win. Those pitchers aren't ready to come and contribute today, but they might be a year or two from now. So maybe you need to go out and do that. So that would be a more aggressive move. It would be a move that would require them to give up more, whether it's Adam Hazley or one of those guys I mentioned who they like so much, who they think is part of their future. So that's kind of the balance that they're trying to strike now in the 48 hours before the deadline. How aggressive are you going to be, and what are you going to give up in order to get the thing you need the most?
So we're talking about defining success in regards to the Philadelphia Phillies season so far and potentially moving forward for the remainder of it. So, Scott, I ask you, is there anything this team can or cannot do in the next 48 hours to deem the trade deadline a success or a failure?
I don't know. I mean, are you asking just in terms of first of all, I don't think, we all like to grade a trade deadline as soon as it's passed. I mean, we all talk about winners and losers and who came out looking good and who didn't. And very often it's not that cut and dry. I mean, you can't judge these things right when they happen. If you're a team that's going for it, like the Cubs, a few years ago when the Cubs won the World Series, they traded Gleyber Torres at the deadline to get Aroldis Chapman. And I think there were a lot of people who probably said as soon as they made that move, they gave up too much. They gave up this prospect in Torres who's going to be great. Well, the Cubs went on to win the World Series with Chapman. And so ultimately that was probably, Cubs fans would look back at that move and say, would you like to have Torres now? Sure, but without Chapman, you might not have that World Series. So these are things that take a little bit more time to grade out. If the Phillies make a minor trade for someone like Tanner Roark and wind up winning the wild card and maybe winning that wild card game and getting themselves an actual playoff round, we'll look back at this deadline and say they made a move that helped them. Successful deadline. If they go out and they don't do anything and they miss the playoffs, we'll look back and go, well, shame on them. They shouldn't have stood pat. They should have done something and been more aggressive. If they make a move and give up a prospect who turns out to be great, and all the Phillies do is win the wild card and get knocked out after one game, you might look back at it and go, bad deadline. So, I mean, I don't know that there's too much that they can do or not do before Wednesday that we'll know instantly whether it's a success or failure. I do think it's going to be a hard sell for them if they do nothing to tell their fans, hey, we did nothing, and that's a good thing because why? So, I am interested to see what happens if they decide not to do anything. I also think there are players in that clubhouse who would like to see them make a move, even if it's a smaller one, to kind of help give them that push that, that might put them over the top in the wild card race. And I don't know that it's going to sit all that well with all of those guys if they don't do anything. If they decide, no, we're good as we are, we're gonna roll with what we have. And I guess they could say that they trust what they've got and those are their guys and all that, but it's going to be a little bit of a sales job on Wednesday, I think, if they don't do anything to explain, especially to their fans, why they feel like the team they've got on the field right now is good enough to get them where they want to go.
Yeah. But, Scott, they're in a tough spot because it seems like a lot of fans have kind of decided that they should sell, and the team entered this season with stupid money, playoff expectations. We're ready to go. So now if you show that you're not, even though maybe they don't think they are, they're in a tough spot either way you slice it, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that what they're going to do ultimately is assuming that they don't make a big splash, and I'm still not convinced entirely of what they're going to do, but I would fall on the side that thinks it's going to be more of a minor move. And I think what they're going to do is they're going to say, look, this is, and you're already starting to hear this from Matt Klentak and Andy McPhail, this is part of the process that when the season started, a lot of people who make predictions had the Phillies pegged for, in the mid to high 80s for wins. They're kind of on pace for, I haven't done the math lately, but, in the 85 to something win range. So they're going to make the claim that they're doing what they were expected to do, and they're in the wild card mix, and buckle up because it's going to be a stretch run where they have a chance to make the playoffs for the first time in 8 years and all of that. And that's going to be the the way they choose to look at things, I think, when everything shakes out on Wednesday, and they've got a Tanner Roark kind of pitcher that they've added, and nobody's jumping through hoops over that. They're going to say, look, we think that this is where we're at, and they're going to say that any suggestion that they were better than that, or that they were, they're going to say, look, we signed Bryce Harper for 13 years because we want to be good for the majority of the next 13 years, not because we're World Series or bust in 2019. So that'll be how they sell it or how they package it, and I think there's more than a little kernel of truth in that. I think that they're looking to be good for some time, and they're in a position where they can do something that they haven't done in 8 years, and I think that they can make a move before Wednesday, even a little one, that can help them do that.
Scott Lauber, everybody, covers the Phillies, have an off day, and then we'll see Wednesday, 4 o'clock. The clock is ticking. We'll see if they look to improve this team or where this team ends up going. It was a tough weekend against the Braves, kind of set the tone of where this team currently sits, and, of course, we always appreciate him joining us here on the Sports Bash. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it, man.
Sure, guys. Anytime.
All right, he, like all guests, appear via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.